Hello, Jesse Dukes here. Thank you so much for listening to The Homework Machine, a special mini-series from MIT's Teach Lab about AI and K-12 education. We are about halfway through the series, and we have more episodes coming, but we're taking a break so some of our production team can have a little summer vacation and visit with family before the flurry of the fall season begins. And we are lucky we have a chance to share an episode of one of our favorite education podcasts with you. I'll talk about that in a second, but first, I have a favor to ask. We've been lucky to see lots of new listeners to the Homework Machine, including folks who weren't necessarily Teach Lab listeners. We want to know more about you, how you found out about the show, what your connection to AI and education is, and maybe your ideas for future reporting or research. You can find a link to our listener survey at our main pod page, teachlabpodcast.com. And everybody who takes the survey will be entered into a drawing to win a $25 gift card. That's teachlabpodcast.com. The survey will probably take you 3 minutes. Now, if you don't know KQED's Mindshift, it's an excellent education podcast. Sometimes it's interview-driven with in-depth discussions with a researcher or educator. Other times, the show does a deep dive into a particular topic, sending reporters into classrooms to talk with teachers and students. This episode is one of the latter, titled Why Poetry is Making a Comeback in Schools. It's reported and hosted by Kara Newhouse. So let's just get to it. Here's Why Poetry is Making a Comeback in Schools from KQED's Mindshift.
"I cannot go to school today," said little Peggy Ann McKay. "I have the measles and the mumps, a gash, a rash, and purple bumps."
That's the voice of Shel Silverstein, who's been one of the most popular poets for elementary schools for multiple generations now. Recent college graduate Aaliyah Farmer remembers loving Silverstein's poems when she was young.
In elementary school and middle school, we were so used to reading poetry like that. And then whenever we got to 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th grade, it was immediate oh, you're reading Shakespeare or Shakespeare-esque poets from before, way before we could even think about.
Aaliyah says that when she read poetry from several centuries ago, the language and the themes felt disconnected from her life. But things changed during her senior year of high school. That's when Aaliyah took AP Literature, and her teacher assigned books by contemporary poets, like Clint Smith and Amy Nezuko Matatil.
That was a comparable experience, 5-year-old or 6-year-old Aaliyah reading Shel Silverstein. I was so excited to read poetry. 18-year-old, 17-year-old Aaliyah reading Clint Smith and Amy, I'm so excited to read it because I just understand it better than other poets I had read before.
For Aaliyah, Clint Smith's writing did something older poetry did not. It reflected the world she was growing up in. Here's an excerpt from Smith's poetry collection, Counting Descent, which explores themes of lineage, tradition, and Black humanity.
My grandfather is a quarter century older than his right to vote and 2 decades younger than the president who signed the paper that made it so. He married my grandmother when they were 4 years younger than I am now and were twice as sure about each other as I've ever been about most things.
For me, and I would say my other friends that I had the class with that were also African American, we had a pride in what he was saying in the book. If he was talking about his father or his grandfather or influential people in his life, we all have that same person in our lives. So we were just able to build that pride. And then also how there's also duality between slavery, but also everything else that we've overcome. We were able to connect. And I think the pride for me came out in that sense as well.
Aaliyah says Counting Descent has stuck with her.
A lot of the books from high school, I'm not going to lie, I did not keep, but that one I did keep.
This is Mindshift, where we explore the future of learning and how we raise our kids. I'm Kara Newhouse.
Much of what we once imagined about the future is here.
Pocket-sized radio instruments will enable individuals to communicate with anyone, anywhere.
But this reshaped reality is also filled with thorny questions that aren't so easy to navigate. Welcome to Shift, a new weekly podcast from PRX.
I present to you Electro, the Moto Man. Ladies and gentlemen.
I would say that one of my greatest skills is my ability to interact with humans.
I'm your host, Jennifer Strong. You can learn more at shiftshow.ai.
Aaliyah Farmer read Clint Smith's book in a class at Lake Norman Charter High School in North Carolina. Her teacher, Melissa Smith, has made it her mission to bring vibrant contemporary poetry into her classroom. She encourages other teachers to do this too, through the social media hashtag #TeachLivingPoets. She's written a book and created a website with the same name.
When I say teach living poets, I don't mean to completely cut off those traditional canonical poets. To discover how they're in conversation with poets today is actually really brilliant and amazing. It's just we need to open the door wider to let more voices into our classrooms and who we're teaching in our poetry curriculum.
Melissa first observed the power of teaching living poets about 8 years ago. That's when she found out that Pulitzer Prize finalist Maury Creech taught at a university not far from her school. She invited him to visit her classes.
He was like here, sitting in front of us and having conversation with us about his poems. And I distinctly remember one of my boys, he was decked out in his soccer uniform because he had a game later that day. And at the end of that class, he said, "Miss Smith, that was the coolest class I ever had." And I was like, by golly, I've unlocked some sort of secret, right? I was like, I need to do this more and more.
So she reached out to poets who were active online. She invited them to speak with her students in person and on Skype.
I saw just the energy change in my classroom. I saw their eyes light up. I saw them actually being interested.
When some of Melissa's students wanted to borrow her poetry books over spring break, she was thrilled. She tweeted about it and tagged the poets.
And Kaveh Akbar, one of my most favorite poets ever, retweeted and said, "Thank you for teaching living poets." And I was like, that has a real ring to it, doesn't it? And so that's how the hashtag was born, was out of his retweet. "Thank you for teaching living poets." And so every time I would share then anything I was doing in my classroom regarding living poets, I included that hashtag with it. And teachers were liking it. They were sharing it. They were replying to it. They were eating it up.
As the Teach Living Poets hashtag grew, Melissa realized there weren't a lot of materials for teaching contemporary poetry in high school English.
You can easily find a curriculum guide for Robert Frost's work or for Shakespeare's sonnets, right? But if you're going to teach a poem that was just published a month ago, there's no Spark Notes for that, right? And so I think a lot of teachers are, I don't want to use the word fearful, but for lack of a better word, nervous or uncomfortable with teaching contemporary poetry because they feel like they have to have all the answers. And that's really not the case.
Melissa created the Teach Living Poets website to fill the gap. She and other English teachers share free lesson plans there.
Sometimes as a teacher, it can be a very isolating job, especially in our current climate, with teachers being attacked by angry parents and, trying to ban books at school board meetings and whatnot. To have a community that you feel supported by and included in can be a game changer for some teachers.
One activity Melissa's students enjoy is a March Madness poetry bracket. It's like the March Madness basketball tournament, but instead of athletes competing, it's poetry.
So first thing we're going to do is we're going to watch the poems one last time.
Each day, Melissa's classes watch 2 poetry videos. Students decide which poem they think is best and try to persuade their classmates in an informal debate. Then they vote. Melissa tallies the votes across all periods. The winners from one week go head-to-head the next week, and so on, until only 2 remain for the final round. That's where things stand today. The students are going to vote for the big winner.
OMG, a true battle of champions.
The first contender is My Honest Poem by Rudy Francisco. It's an exploration of his fears and flaws. Here's an excerpt.
I'm still learning how to whisper. I'm often loud in places where I should be quiet. I'm often quiet in places where I should be loud. I was born feet first, and I've been backwards ever since.
The other finalist in today's showdown is called Touchscreen by Marshall Davis Jones. It's about how technology is reshaping our lives.
Introducing the new Apple iPerson complete with multi-touch and volume control. Doesn't it feel good to touch? Doesn't it feel good to touch? Doesn't it feel good to touch? My world is so digital that I have forgotten what that feels like.
Some of Melissa's students take notes at desks around the edge of the room. Others lounge on comfy chairs in the middle, using lap pads to write on. When the second poem finishes playing, they dive into discussion.
There's this one line where he says, we used to be in the trees, we swung down, and then someone slipped a disc, and now we're hunched over touchscreens, right? And if you think of that image of like the human evolution, right? What is hunched over is the ape, the primates, and what is standing up is the human. And if we're hunched over again, does that mean we're going backwards? And
they debate how well each poem conveys its message.
Some of the quotes, for example, I wonder what my bedsheets say when I'm not around. I feel like that's kind of one of those things where you don't know your own identity, so it's kind of a broader message that Rudy is speaking. And I feel like that what makes it where it's easier to relate to.
And they reflect on bigger issues raised by the poets.
I think that the fact that technology is such a prevalent problem, like everybody knows, you are constantly told not to be on your phone, to limit your screen time over and over and over. What isn't talked about is how all of us face our own like internal issues. And I think that's what makes like My Honest Poem more impactful, because nobody really talks about that.
I'd like to say that I think a lot of these internal issues, at least in modern society, are being intensified by the technology talked about in touchscreen. I mean, if you look, you could say it's correlation.
These high school seniors are identifying literary devices, citing evidence to support their arguments, and connecting what they've heard to their own lives. These are all the things English teachers want to hear in class. They're also laughing and being playful with each other. Melissa says that's typical.
At first, the kids are like, oh yeah, this is fine, this is cool. But once we get down to like the final four, and especially the last two poems, they start arguing. They start getting really, invested in the poem that they like better. They try to convince their neighbor, like, no man, vote for the other one.
After 15 minutes of discussion, it's time to pick a winner.
All right, heads down, secret vote. Raise your hand if you want to vote for Rudy Francisco, My Honest Poem. Raise your hand if you want to vote for Marshall Jones' Touchscreen.
The students won't hear the winner until the next day. But when Melissa counts votes across all her classes, Touchscreen, the poem about technology, comes out on top. After the vote, they move on to an activity called tone bottles.
And so one of your glitter choices is going to represent the tone before the shift.
This lesson plan was created by another teacher, Valerie A. Person. She shared it on Melissa's Teach Living Poets website. It's meant to help students capture the tone of a poem.
Right? So what is the author's attitude towards his subject before the shift? And then the other type of glitter you're adding into your bottle is the tone after the shift, right? So
each student has picked a poem to analyze. They fill a 16-ounce bottle with hot water and glue. Then add food dye, glitter, and sequins.
You can mix colors if you want, just use one, whatever you think represents the theme of your poem. Back there.
When they're finished, Melissa adds mineral oil and hand soap to the bottles to create viscosity. Students shake up their bottles to see the glitter and sequins swirl around. They also write a paragraph on an index card explaining how their tone bottle reflects their poem. A student named Dean based his bottle on Looking for the Golf Motel by Richard Blanco.
Yeah.
And why did you pick orange for your liquid?
Because it reminds me of the sunset that he was describing.
And what glitter do you have in there?
I have a mixture of red and yellow to go counteract the orange, but then I also have black describing his feelings when he couldn't find it.
Oh, that's really good.
Yeah.
Nice job, Dean.
Another student, Christina, chose a poem called Like When Passing Graveyards by R.A. Villanueva. In it, the poet recalls holding his breath when riding past cemeteries as a child.
So the sparkles are for nostalgia and your childhood, But then also the dark color is the whole point of the poem is like, it's about a childhood fear. So I wanted to do something that shows like the darkness of a graveyard and the fear behind it, but it's also like the nostalgia of growing up with your siblings and like having these connections and these little fears that you like create off each other.
Christina says she enjoys this approach to analyzing a poem.
I feel like it makes it honestly a little bit more fun. It's like kindergarten, but also it makes it more visual, because a lot of the time when you're just writing what you feel from a poem or what you imagine, it's when you notice like the colors and like you're able to point out more techniques and like the smaller details of a poem, especially when we're looking for certain lines and certain words, rather than just, oh, what's the theme, what's the tone? Like you're looking for more specifics.
With these activities, students are practicing the same academic skills as when they study any other piece of literature. But Melissa says focusing on living poets does two things that studying dead poets does not. The first is that it diversifies the literary canon. We heard a little about that from Aaliyah, the former student who identified with Clint Smith's poems about his experiences as an African American. Melissa has a lot of stories about her students finding personal connections to living poets. Like when she gave a blog writing assignment, and 2 transgender students chose to write about the trans poet H. Melt. Here's an excerpt from H. Melt.
When they say we are all trapped in the wrong body, imposter, impossible, no. We are on the bus next to you, in the cubicle next to you.
H. Melt sent signed book copies to Melissa's 2 students after she shared their blogs.
And it was really special that now they have this signed copy of a poet that they studied in class and just fell in love with and felt that common bond with, because that's like part of their identity.
Kava Akbar's poem about addiction resonated with another student.
In Fort Wayne, I drank the seniors. Old Milwaukee, Old Crow. In Indianapolis, I stopped. Now, I regret every drink I never took.
One of my students' father was struggling with alcoholism, and the way that the poem hit her was very different than how I took in the poem. Hers was just more raw and emotional and personal, and really beautiful, actually, in the way that she processed it and tied it to her own experiences with her family.
A Latina student told Melissa that her class was the first time in her entire schooling she'd been assigned a book by a Latino writer.
And she's a senior. So it's moments like that that make like all of this, the Teach Living Poets hashtag movement, website, all the things happening in the classroom worth it.
The second big thing Melissa says teaching living poets can do is empower students as writers. Every spring, she organizes a big workshop where guest poets visit in person to give readings and discuss their craft with her students.
It was probably one of my favorite days of high school. I sat at a table with R.A. Villanueva and I was just like freaked out the whole time, like kind of starstruck.
This is Jenna Johnson, another of Melissa's former students.
I started writing when I was about 15, and like it felt important in the moment, but looking back, it's like reading your embarrassing like diary. I don't know, like a lot of just like melodramatic like high school love poems, breakup poems, all that stuff.
The workshop was her first time hearing poets read their work live.
That just like changes how you can approach someone's work completely. Hearing like the tone and like the voice that they intend for it to be read.
Early in high school, Jenna planned to become a nurse, but when she didn't like AP Bio and loved AP Lit, she started rethinking her path.
One of the big things that like I didn't realize until I read contemporary poets is kind of like the lawlessness of poetry. Like you don't have to like adhere to like strict forms or rhyme schemes or kind of knowing that you can literally just write a poem. There's so many different forms. You can do literally anything with it. That was a huge thing to me that felt like that made it something I could do.
Jenna is now in a creative writing master's program at New York University. She wants to continue writing poetry and become a professor. This fall, she's teaching a writing class for undergraduates.
I've been thinking a lot about Miss Smith because I know that, like, I felt like I had a really good education in poetry because of her, and, like, I felt really well prepared going into undergrad and grad school that I knew of these contemporary poets and stuff. So when I was writing my syllabus, I was thinking a lot about it and, like, including as many living poets as possible that I felt like my students could or will be able to, like, feel close to and feel like they can relate to a lot more.
Remember how Jenna said she felt starstruck sitting next to a guest writer at the poetry workshop? I spoke with that poet, R.A. Villanueva, whose first name is Ron.
We opened class with still images where, by the thousands above Costa Brava, starlings flock and tumble, swirl in answer to some unseen danger they're looping dark against that bonfire sky shifting.
Ron is not only a living poet, he's also a middle school English teacher and a professor at Sarah Lawrence College. He met Melissa on Twitter around the time she started the Teach Living Poets hashtag. He says it was inspiring to see that conversation spread among teachers.
Melissa's pedagogy really continues to vivify and bring to life over and over again the fact that poetry is not some ancient, antiquated form for us to be archaeologists and dig around in, but it's that and something else. It's something contemporary. It's something modern. It's something that people do because they love and are frustrated by language.
Ron is a recurring guest at Melissa's poetry workshop. He says her classroom is special because of the way she challenges students academically while also centering joy. He thinks too often teachers are told that joy and rigor can't coexist.
What if rigor is not just pain? and like, what if rigor is what you're actually trying to say is like, there's a certain intensity, but intensity can also be imagination. And that's what her classroom feels like. There are skills that are being tested, muscles that are being stretched, but it's not done only through trauma or grief or like rote memorization and then regurgitation. It's something else. It's something weirder. And I think that is what we should allow teachers to have space to try.
Melissa says teaching living poets has transformed not only what she teaches, but how she teaches.
It has re-sparked my passion for teaching in general. I have loosened up my sense of the need for control over the lesson and the learning, and giving some of that control over to my students. I have come to realize for me in my classroom that the best learning happens when I actually don't say a thing, right? Where I allow my students to have a conversation, to collaborate, and to explore a poem together, and then to share it with me.
The contemporary poetry scene is full of innovative and diverse writers. By inviting those voices into their classrooms, teachers can open doors for students to connect with the rhythms and rhymes of poetry. And that can help them grow as readers, writers, and people. This episode would not have been possible without Melissa Smith. To learn more, you can read the book she wrote with Lindsay Illick. It's called Teach Living Poets. The students you heard in this episode were Shu Ting, Colin, Emma, Sam, Dean, and Christina. Thanks also to Aaliyah Farmer, Jenna Johnson, and Ron Villanueva. I'm Kara Newhouse. The rest of the Mindshift team includes Ki Sung, Marlena Jackson-Rotondo, Nima Gobier, and Jennifer Ng. Our editor is Chris Hambrick. Seth Samuel is our sound designer. Additional support from Jen Chian, Katie Springer, Maha Sanad, and Holly Kernan. David Borax provided field recording. Mindshift is supported in part by the generosity of the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation and members of KQED. If you love Mindshift and enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend. We really appreciate it. You can also read more or subscribe to our newsletter at kqed.org/Mindshift. Thank you for listening to Season 9 of the Mindshift podcast. That's it for these deep dive episodes. Mindshift will be back soon with new episodes featuring conversations about big ideas in education. Be sure to follow the show so you don't miss a thing.
That was KQED's Mindshift, available wherever you get your podcasts. We will be back in a little over a week with new episodes of The Homework Machine from MIT's Teach Lab. In the meantime, please visit teachlabpodcast.com for a link to our listener survey. I'm Jesse Dukes. See you soon.